Rome, 67 years after Christ. Emperor Nero continues his relentless persecution of Christians. 3 years earlier, 10 out of Rome's 14 districts had been destroyed by a great fire. To escape blame, the emperor decided to hold Christianity and its followers responsible. Believing in Jesus and in the teachings he left during his time on earth was enough for public execution. It is during this hunt for Christians that Peter is arrested. He is already an elderly man when he is taken by Roman authorities. He is no longer the fisherman from Galilee. He is someone known within the Christian community as a spiritual guide. The sentence he gets is the most cruel and painful form of execution in the Roman Empire, reserved only for rebels, slaves, and enemies of the emperor. A slow and public death, crucifixion. Facing the end, Peter makes one of the decisions that would become fundamental to understanding his role in history and Christian doctrine. The one who had denied Christ 3 times asks to be crucified upside down, considering himself unworthy to die in the same manner as his master. The request is granted. The scene is not written in the Gospels, but it was transmitted through the memory of the early church and recorded by ancient Christian authors. For the first Christians, this was a testimony of courage and humility. Peter accepts death in the most extreme way possible at the center of the empire that persecuted his brothers in the faith. It is the final gesture of someone who chose to remain faithful. Before being arrested in Rome, before becoming the first pope, or even before meeting Jesus, Peter was once Simon, a simple man who lived as a fisherman in Capernaum, north of today's Israel, brother of Andrew, who would also become an apostle, and a friend of James and John. His first encounter with faith happens when Jesus asks him for something simple, to use his boat so he could preach to a crowd that wanted to hear him. Simon accepts the request. Jesus sits in the boat, moves a little away from the shore, and from there delivers his teachings. Simon's generosity was even greater because that night he had tried in vain to catch a single fish. At the end of the preaching, Jesus turns to him and says, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon replies that he worked all night and caught nothing. Even so, he decides to obey. The catch is so great that the nets begin to tear. Simon has to call James and John for help. The boats nearly sink under the weight of the fish. Faced with a miracle, Simon falls at Jesus' feet. Then he asks Christ to depart because he is a sinful man, not worthy of his presence. This is the moment of conversion, and it is born of recognizing one's own limits. Simon realizes he is before something greater than he can control. Jesus, however, does not leave. He tells Simon not to be afraid, and then he makes the call that changes his life and the history of the world. From that moment on, he would no longer look for fish, but rather he would fish for men. Simon leaves the boat, leaves the nets, leaves the lake, and begins to follow Jesus. He closely follows the teachings, witnesses miracles, and observes conflict growing as Jesus' presence begins to disturb religious and political authorities. In Caesarea Philippi, far from Jerusalem and the religious centers, Jesus asks the disciples a direct question. He asks, "But who do you say that I am?" And it is Simon who answers. He declares that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus responds, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Then he does something that, in biblical tradition, is never merely symbolic. He changes Simon's name. "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Simon then becomes Peter, a word that refers to rock, and symbolizes Peter's new responsibility. From that moment on, he is called to sustain what would become the Roman Catholic Apostolic Church. After the confession at Caesarea Philippi, Jesus begins to speak openly with the disciples about what would happen in Jerusalem. He says he would be arrested, he would suffer, and would eventually be killed. Peter disagrees. He takes Jesus aside and tries to stop him, saying that this must never happen. Peter recognizes the Messiah, but still does not understand the way of the cross. At the Last Supper, Jesus states that all of them would abandon him. Peter responds with conviction, saying he never would, even if all the others failed. Jesus then tells him that before the rooster crows, he will deny him 3 times. The arrest happens that very night. Jesus is taken, the disciples flee, and Peter decides to follow from a distance. In the courtyard where Jesus is interrogated, Peter then is recognized. They ask if he was also a disciple of that man. Peter denies it. He denies it once, then again, and finally a 3rd time. Soon after, the rooster crows. Jesus is crucified the next day. Peter remains alive, carrying the weight of having failed when he had most promised fidelity. After the resurrection, Jesus meets the disciples again, and it is with Peter that he directly addresses what happened. By the lakeside, the same setting where everything began, Jesus asks him 3 times if he loves him. With each answer, Jesus entrusts him with a concrete task, repeating the same charge: feed his lambs and care for his sheep. It is this man, aware of his own fragility, who is now prepared to assume the central role among Christians. After the resurrection and Pentecost, the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles of Jesus Christ, Peter begins to assume a clear leadership among Christians. The book of Acts presents him speaking before the crowd in Jerusalem, publicly explaining who Jesus is and the meaning of his death and resurrection. It is Peter who proclaims, who guides, and who confirms the first converts. He is also the one who makes important decisions in the emerging community. He guides the apostles, faces persecution, is arrested, interrogated, and warned by religious authorities. Even so, he continues preaching, not as someone speaking on his own behalf, but as a witness of the living God. Over time, Christian tradition recounts that Peter leaves Jerusalem and continues proclaiming the gospel until he arrives in Rome, the center of the empire. It is in this context that Peter becomes recognized as the main leader of the church in Rome. For this reason, tradition considers him the first bishop of Rome, the one who would later be called Pope. In Rome, during Nero's persecution, Peter is arrested, and there his history meets the same fate as so many other Christians: martyrdom. Condemned to crucifixion, Peter does not flee. He does not renounce the faith he now upholds. He asks only not to die in the same way as Jesus, considering himself unworthy of that. The man who once denied Christ out of fear now faces death without retreat. The mission that began by a lake ends in the heart of the Roman Empire. Peter's story ceases to be merely the trajectory of a man and becomes intertwined with the very history of Christianity. Centuries after Peter's death, excavations carried out beneath St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican revealed an ancient Roman necropolis. Among tombs, inscriptions, and bones, there lies buried the apostle crucified in Rome. The location was not chosen at random. From the earliest centuries, Christians made pilgrimages to that site to pray at the tomb of the one they considered the principal witness of the faith in Rome. Peter's story is not that of a man exceptional from the beginning. It is the story of someone who fell, who was corrected, restored, and remained faithful until the end. Precisely for that reason, his journey became a reference for entire generations. Peter's conversion did not transform only his life. It helped sustain a faith that endured persecutions, empires, wars, and centuries. A faith that left the shores of the Sea of Galilee and reached every continent. Millions of people throughout history found in Peter's example the real possibility of conversion. The idea that faith does not begin in holiness, but in responding to a call. A faith that began with the birth of a child in Bethlehem and forever changed the course of history. Christmas marks exactly that turning point. After Christ, nothing was ever the same. And it was from that birth that stories like Peter's became possible. St. Peter's mission did not end with his martyrdom. It began a succession that would influence faith, politics, and civilization for centuries. The papacy remains one of the most influential institutions in human history. Often misunderstood, yes. Often debated too, but never irrelevant. In our original special series on the papacy, we explore the lives, mysteries, struggles, and defining moments of the successors of St. Peter, from spiritual leadership to global impact. This is a journey through power, faith, and history unlike any other. Watch this exclusive series on our platform and take advantage of our special discount available for a limited time. Tap the link in the description or scan the QR code and unlock the full experience.